Well, thank you. I think this is an important hearing because it is we are in front of a European election that will be monumental. There is a lot of Euroscepticism all over Europe, both in the north, because people believe their money are not spent well, and in the south or other places for other reasons. And in my mind, in order to be able to move forward to a more integrated Europe, we have to make sure that the money we spend is properly spent. This is not an easy task. Us here in the Budgetary Control Committee, in the last few years that I have this experience, have realized that we could do a lot better in spending EU money. Most of it is spent by member states, but this is not an excuse. And when we look into the first special report by the Court of Auditor, this realization is made very, very concrete. Now, in order to spend money more efficiently and effectively, one has to do better planning, of course, make better decisions, but it is also important to have much better control in the end. And the effectiveness and efficiency controls are not ceremonial as many of the legality controls tend to be, and they tend to be both in our countries, where we have legality controls for budgetary spending, and they tend to be ceremonial also in many cases here in the European Union for the European Union money. We've been in places where we can see super fast trains going super fast, half empty, and at the same time they go along with super highways that are totally empty. We've been in places where we had ports that have finished for 5 years and they are not yet connected to the railway system in order to function. And these are obvious cases, or places where we have parapets for sound in fields so that cows cannot hear the cars that are going by. We've seen European money badly spent, and we need to improve that very much. Now, the experience on how to do that is not here in the European Union. In most of our member states, we do not do more than legality checks for the way we spend the money in our own countries. So it is important to be able to improve this experience and to have a coherent message to the European taxpayers and voters that we will get much better, and thus we will ask them to give a positive view towards Europe. This session, this hearing, will help us get better and will help us bring forth these special reports, which I have to tell you, being rapporteur in a couple of them, are extremely well done and extremely useful. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Mr. Skylakakis, the floor is yours, please, to your rapporteur.
Thank you. And first I would like to thank both the President of the Court and the Commissioner for their presentations. I have a question and an observation. The question is towards the President of the Court of Auditors and has to do with the high-risk areas. We've been presented on how in the US there is a strategy to find out what are the high-risk areas for further, let's say, action It could be action by other agencies, action by the Commission, or action by the Court. So do you have in your mind that this practice of trying to find the high-risk areas could be implemented? Because this could be a very important addition in the way we deal with things. A second, now my observation has to do with whether measuring things could be a disaster. Now, of course, if we put into our objectives things that we cannot achieve, then of course measuring it would be a disaster. But already we have disasters. For example, the unemployment rate all over Europe is a disaster, and in special countries it's a total disaster. And by putting our head in the sand and saying national sovereignty, we should not do anything to affect national sovereignty. I can tell you this is no way to go forward. With national sovereignty, nobody is going to build a competitive Europe. And we already have major moves away from national sovereignty in the fiscal environment. So how can we possibly deal with this move in the fiscal environment against national sovereignty when the federal money that could make this giving up the national sovereignty in the fiscal environment are not used effectively? The European money is essentially the federal money that could make this fiscal union work better. And in the US, this federal money is a totally different level than in Europe. And now we are saying that we don't want to measure it. I think this is going to be a big problem in European competitiveness in the future. Because if we don't even dare to measure, then how can we be competitive? I will only remind you of our efforts back in the early 2000s to become the most competitive innovation economy in the world. We didn't put anything to measure the steps. And where did we come?
I have a very nice duty to ask our honorable rapporteur. Would you like Mr. Skylakakis to express any comments on your side? Still, we have some minutes.
Okay, then we will be able to end this hearing, which I think was very, very useful earlier, which is not bad for this afternoon. Let me conclude by saying first that we've learned some things on how other people act from the US. I believe that the fact that we are now starting this performance-oriented effort, while in the US this has been done for a very long time, has to do with the amount of money we spend. We spend 1% of less than 1% of our GDP in EU money, while in the US we are talking about, 15 times that. I think that's close. So it's obvious that it's much more advanced on how they look into the spending in the federal level. I believe that there are things that we can look into. I will come back to the issue of high-risk areas, because it's not exactly as dear President Caldeira said, the way that I imagine high-risk areas. I mean not, I mean specific areas of spending, either geographical or program areas, where we think that there might be increased problems. In my mind, it's difficult to convince European citizens to spend more money at the EU level because they have reservations on how we spend it, especially the countries that give more funds than they receive from the EU level. At the same time, other countries that participate in our common effort and are less, let's say, less export-oriented and are so they don't take full benefit from the single market, also have in their interest for EU money to be better spent, because money is going to be in dear demand in the next seven years. So the effort, I believe, is common all over Europe, and the basis of what we should do should start with measuring things. You can never say how you have spent things unless you have measured properly what you have done. And I believe this should be the first basis of the performance indicators that we have. And we must measure things, and that might address my colleague Ms. Pieper, who has left, his reservations. We must measure things that are directly related to what we have spent. We should not measure things that are close to impossible to find the link between what we have spent and what is the deliverable. If you do that, then you enter into an area where the measurement makes no sense. So I would say that we should not put into our performance standards, for both the reasons of Mr. Pieper and for practical reasons, things that are not totally and directly related with the specific effort. Still, there is a lot of measurement to be done if we do only that. If we say that in a port we expect that percentage of carriers to come from the national percentage, this is close. This is something specific, and we can measure it. And it's quite close to what we have been doing. It's going to be a trial and error situation, but I believe it's the right way to go, and I believe that the court can be very, very helpful in this effort. Personally, I've been supporting that we must give the maximum exposure to the special reports, and I hope that as a committee and as a parliament we will use your good work to improve the way we spend other people's money. Thank you.